Nobody expected federal Judge Aileen Cannon to interrupt Pam Bondi just 30 seconds into her opening argument. Her condescending smile and dismissive wave suggested this would be another easy case. She was catastrophically wrong. The Miami federal courthouse had seen its share of high-profile cases, but the atmosphere that Tuesday morning was electric with tension. Built in 1936 during the height of the New Deal, the imposing Art Deco structure had witnessed countless legal battles, from organized crime prosecutions in the 50s to civil rights cases in the 60s to modern terrorism trials in the new millennium. Today would add another chapter to its storied history. At stake was more than just a legal precedent. It was a battle between old guard judicial arrogance and the sharp legal mind of Florida's former Attorney General. The constitutional implications stretched far beyond Florida's borders, potentially affecting how federal and state prosecutors would interact for generations to come. Pam Bondi stood at the counsel table, her navy blue suit a stark contrast against the rich mahogany paneling of Courtroom 6. At 58, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades in legal battles, from prosecuting cartel kingpins in the dangerous neighborhoods of Tampa to arguing before the Supreme Court in landmark cases that had shaped American jurisprudence. Her journey to this moment had been paved with countless victories against seemingly impossible odds. Born in Tampa to a family of educators, Bondi had learned early that preparation was the key to success. Her father, a high school principal, had taught her that respect must be earned through competence, not demanded through authority. Her mother, a speech therapist, had instilled in her the power of precise communication and the importance of choosing words carefully. These lessons would serve her well in the confrontation that was about to unfold. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and her expression remained calm despite the packed gallery behind her. She had faced death threats from cartel members, hostile questioning from partisan politicians, and relentless scrutiny from media outlets that disagreed with her positions. This judicial hostility was just another obstacle to overcome. The case that brought her here involved a complex constitutional challenge to federal overreach in state prosecutorial decisions. Bondi represented a coalition of 17 state attorneys general, challenging the Department of Justice's attempt to supersede local corruption investigations. The federal government claimed that state prosecutors were moving too slowly on cases involving interstate commerce. The states argued that this was precisely the kind of federal overreach the Constitution was designed to prevent. It was exactly the kind of federalism battle that had defined her career, the kind that separated true constitutional scholars from political opportunists. For Bondi, this wasn't about partisan politics, it was about protecting the delicate balance of power that made American democracy possible. Judge Aileen Cannon, appointed to the federal bench just 5 years earlier, had already developed a reputation for intellectual superiority that made even seasoned attorneys nervous. At 42, her sharp features and penetrating gaze gave her an intimidating presence that she wielded like a weapon from the bench. Known for interrupting attorneys mid-sentence and dismissing arguments with theatrical precision, Cannon had never met a constitutional theory she couldn't dismantle. Her reputation preceded her through the legal community, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Young attorneys would spend sleepless nights preparing for appearances before Cannon, knowing that a single misstep could result in public humiliation. Senior partners at prestigious law firms would warn their associates about Cannon's particular brand of judicial superiority, the way she seemed to take pleasure in exposing what she perceived as intellectual weakness. The judges' chambers were filled with accolades from her time at Duke Law School, awards from conservative legal organizations, and photographs with influential political figures. But those who worked closely with Cannon knew that beneath the accomplished exterior lay a jurist driven by rigid ideology, who used her judicial robes as a shield against criticism. Her law clerks, brilliant graduates from elite law schools, learned quickly to anticipate her preferences and avoid triggering her legendary impatience. Cannon had built her reputation on a foundation of conservative judicial philosophy and unwavering adherence to textualism, rather than courtroom experience with real-world consequences. Unlike Bondi, who had spent years in the trenches, prosecuting dangerous criminals and protecting vulnerable victims, Cannon had moved from law school to a prestigious federal clerkship, to a corporate law firm, to the bench, without ever experiencing the gritty reality of criminal justice. As Bondi approached the podium that morning, she carried with her not just legal briefs, but also a manila folder that her paralegal had handed her just minutes before court began. The contents of that folder would soon turn what Cannon expected to be a routine dismissal into the most humiliating moment of her judicial career. Her paralegal, Sarah Chen, had worked tirelessly through the night, following leads from a whistleblower who had contacted Bondi's office just 48 hours earlier. The whistleblower, a career Justice Department attorney, had grown increasingly troubled by what they witnessed in the case preparation meetings, and had finally decided that constitutional principles mattered more than career advancement. The courtroom itself was a monument to judicial authority, with its soaring ceilings, marble columns, and ornate woodwork that seemed designed to intimidate those who dared challenge the system. Federal marshals stood at attention along the walls, their presence a reminder that this was a place where the full power of the United States government could be brought to bear. The gallery was packed with journalists, legal observers, and curious members of the public who had somehow managed to secure seats for what promised to be a significant constitutional hearing. In the front row sat Professor Elena Rodriguez from Georgetown Law School, who had come specifically to observe Bondi's constitutional arguments. Behind her, veteran attorneys from the city's most prestigious firms whispered among themselves about the unusual nature of the case and the potential implications for federal-state relations. Court reporters prepared their stenotype machines, knowing that every word spoken might become part of legal history. The morning air was thick with anticipation as spectators settled into their seats and attorneys made final preparations. Outside the courthouse, protesters from both sides held signs supporting either federal authority or states' rights, their chants providing a distant backdrop to the drama about to unfold inside. "Your Honor," Bondi began, her voice clear and authoritative, "the question before this court today strikes at the very heart of our constitutional framework. When federal prosecutors attempt to override state..." "Stop right there, Bondi," Judge Cannon interrupted, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade through silk. The sudden interruption sent a ripple of surprise through the packed gallery. Veteran court reporters looked up from their stenotype machines, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. Cannon leaned back in her leather chair, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, like a predator who had just spotted easy prey. "I've reviewed your brief, and I must say, I'm disappointed. For someone with your reputation, I expected more sophisticated legal reasoning." The courtroom fell completely silent, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above her machine, the steady clicking that usually provided background rhythm suddenly absent. In the gallery, Professor Rodriguez frowned deeply, recognizing this as highly inappropriate judicial behavior. In 20 years of federal practice, veteran attorneys in the gallery had rarely seen a judge interrupt an opening argument so abrupt, especially with such obvious disdain. Bondi's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the subtle shift in posture that indicated her legal mind was already calculating response. She had faced down cartel lawyers who threatened her family, corrupt politicians who tried to buy her silence, and hostile media that questioned her every move, but this level of judicial disrespect was unusual even by her standards. "Your Honor," she replied evenly, her voice maintaining perfect professional composure, "if I may continue with my argument, I believe the constitutional issues will become clear." Cannon waved her hand dismissively, like a queen dismissing a bothersome peasant. "Miss Bondi, I've been on this bench for 5 years. I've heard every federalism argument imaginable, from attorneys far more experienced than yourself. Your theory that states can simply ignore federal prosecutorial authority is not just wrong, it's dangerously naive. A murmur ran through the courtroom, like wind through autumn leaves. Several attorneys exchanged glances, recognizing that Cannon was not just disagreeing with Bondi's legal position, but personally attacking her competence. The judge's tone carried the condescension typically reserved for first-year law students, not former state attorneys general with decades of constitutional experience. Professor Rodriguez took careful notes, documenting what she was witnessing, for a potential ethics complaint. In her 25 years of observing federal courts, she had never seen such inappropriate judicial conduct, directed at a respected advocate. Furthermore, Cannon continued, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight, your citation of the 10th Amendment cases from the 1990s shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how constitutional law has evolved. Perhaps you should spend more time studying recent precedent, instead of relying on outdated theories from your political career. The personal attack hung in the air, like smoke from a fired gun. Bondi stood motionless at the podium, her hands resting lightly on her notes, her breathing steady and controlled. Those who had worked with her in the Attorney General's office knew this was her most dangerous moment, not when she was angry, but when she was calculating, when her prosecutorial instincts were taking over. In the gallery, several prominent attorneys began typing messages on their phones, alerting colleagues about the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. This wasn't just a legal hearing anymore, it was becoming a test of judicial ethics and professional conduct. Your Honor, Bondi said, her voice still perfectly controlled, like steel wrapped in velvet, I appreciate the court's observations. However, I believe there may be some factual issues that could affect this court's analysis. Cannon's eyebrows rose in mock surprise, her law school debate training clearly on full display. Factual issues? Ms. Bondi, this is a question of law, not fact. Are you perhaps confused about the nature of constitutional interpretation? The insult was so obvious that several attorneys in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Court officers standing along the walls maintained their professional composure, but their expressions suggested even they were surprised by Cannon's hostile approach. One federal marshal glanced toward the chief deputy, with a look that clearly questioned whether this behavior was appropriate. Not at all, Your Honor, Bondi replied, reaching for the manila folder her paralegal had given her. But I wonder if the court is aware of certain recent developments that might affect this case. Cannon leaned forward, her confidence unwavering, like a boxer who believes she has her opponent on the ropes. Ms. Bondi, unless you have some earth-shattering revelation that has escaped the attention of federal prosecutors, the Justice Department, and this court, I suggest you focus on legal arguments, rather than whatever political theater you're planning. It was the opening Bondi had been waiting for, the moment when overconfidence would become the judge's greatest weakness. She opened the manila folder and removed a single document, holding it up so Cannon could see it clearly. The gesture was deliberate and dramatic, designed to capture the attention of everyone in the courtroom. Your Honor, I have here a copy of an email sent yesterday from the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility to the lead prosecutor in this case. The change in Cannon's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The supreme confidence flickered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like concern. Her law clerk, sitting directly behind the bench, leaned forward with obvious interest, recognizing that something significant was about to happen. The email, Bondi continued, her voice gaining strength, like a prosecutor who had just found the smoking gun, indicates that the federal prosecution this court is being asked to protect is currently under internal investigation for prosecutorial misconduct. A buzz of whispered conversations erupted throughout the courtroom, like a hive of bees suddenly disturbed. Cannon banged her gavel once, but her usual commanding presence seemed diminished, like a deflating balloon. Professor Rodriguez stopped taking notes and stared at Bondi with obvious admiration, recognizing brilliant advocacy when she saw it.
Ms. Bondi, I don't see how internal Justice Department personnel matters relate to the constitutional questions before this court. Oh, but they do, Your Honor, Bondi replied, her professional smile never wavering, like a chess master who had just seen checkmate. Because the email specifically references this court's jurisdiction and suggests that the federal prosecutor may have provided false information about the scope of their investigation. Cannon's face had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks, like water from a broken dam. The arrogant smirk that had dominated her features moments earlier was nowhere to be seen. Her hands, which had been gesturing confidently throughout her interruptions, now gripped the edge of the bench, with obvious tension. That's a very serious allegation. Ms. Bondi, I trust you have evidence to support such claim. Bondi reached into the folder again and removed a thick stack of documents. I have copies of the original Justice Department communications, Your Honor, including the ones that directly contradict the representations made to this court last month. The lead federal prosecutor, James Richardson, finally stood up at his table, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Richardson had built his career on high-profile prosecutions and had never faced this kind of public challenge to his professional integrity. Your Honor, we object to this ambush. These documents weren't part of the discovery process. That's because they were deliberately withheld, Mr. Richardson. Bondi replied smoothly, her tone now carrying the authority of someone who had completely shifted the power dynamic. Which is exactly the point. The federal government is asking this court to protect a prosecution that its own Office of Professional Responsibility has flagged for potential ethics violation. Judge Cannon looked from Bondi to Richardson and back again, clearly trying to process this unexpected development, like a computer attempting to run a program it wasn't designed to handle. The supreme confidence that had marked her earlier interruption was evaporating in real time, like morning mist before the rising sun. Several spectators in the gallery pulled out their phones to document what was clearly becoming a historic moment. Your Honor, Bondi continued, sensing the shift in momentum, like a predator sensing wounded prey, I move that this court review these documents in camera before proceeding with any ruling on federal jurisdiction. Cannon sat back in her chair, her earlier theatrical dominance replaced by obvious uncertainty, like an actor who had forgotten her lines. This is highly irregular, Ms. Bondi. What's irregular, Your Honor, is federal prosecutors providing incomplete information to this court. What's irregular is asking a federal judge to protect a prosecution that may itself be ethically compromised. The courtroom had fallen completely silent, except for the soft whir of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic from the busy street below. Every person in the packed gallery understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, a complete reversal of courtroom dynamics in the span of 10 minutes. The court stenographer's fingers moved rapidly, knowing that this transcript would be studied for years to come.
Your Honor, Bondi pressed on, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades building ironclad cases. The documents I've presented raise serious questions about whether this court has been given accurate information about the federal interest in this case. If the Justice Department's own ethics officials are investigating the prosecutors for misconduct, how can this court rely on their representations about federal prosecutorial necessity? Cannon cleared her throat, a nervous gesture that veteran court watchers had never seen from her before. Her law clerk discreetly slid a note across the bench, suggesting that the judge might want to proceed more carefully. Ms. Bondi, these are significant allegations. The court will need time to review these materials. Of course, Your Honor, Bondi replied graciously, like a victor who could afford to be magnanimous. I'm sure the court wants to ensure it has all the relevant information before making such an important constitutional ruling. The federal prosecutor tried one more time to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. Your Honor, even if there are internal Justice Department investigations, that doesn't affect the constitutional questions before this court. Bondi turned slightly toward Richardson, her expression patient but firm, like a teacher explaining basic concepts to a struggling student. Mr. Richardson, with respect, if your office provided false or misleading information to obtain jurisdiction, that absolutely affects the constitutional analysis. Federal jurisdiction isn't a blank check. It requires good faith and accurate representations. Judge Cannon reached for her water glass with a hand that seemed slightly unsteady, like a person trying to maintain composure in the face of unexpected defeat. The transformation from supreme confidence to visible uncertainty was remarkable to witness. Several attorneys in the gallery later described it as one of the most dramatic reversals they had ever seen in federal court. Your Honor, Bondi continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely shifted the power dynamic. I also have documentation showing that the state investigation this federal prosecution is supposedly protecting was actually completed 6 months ago. The federal prosecutors were apparently unaware of this when they made their jurisdictional claims. A gasp went through the courtroom, like air being sucked from a punctured tire. If true, this meant the federal prosecutors had sought to override state authority to protect an investigation that no longer existed. Professor Rodriguez began furiously typing notes on her laptop, recognizing that she was witnessing a potential constitutional law casebook moment. Cannon set down her water glass and looked directly at the federal prosecutor's table, her expression that of someone who had just realized the ground beneath her feet was shifting. Mr. Richardson, is it true that the underlying state investigation has been completed? Richardson's pause was answer enough, the silence stretching like a taut wire, ready to snap. His co-counsel whispered urgently in his ear, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make the situation worse. Your Honor, we may not have had complete information about the status of all related state proceedings. The admission hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, reverberating off the marble walls and settling into the consciousness of everyone present. Bondi remained standing at the podium, her expression professional but satisfied, like a master craftsman who had just completed a perfect work of art. She had done exactly what great prosecutors do, turned what appeared to be a losing case into a complete victory through superior preparation and unshakable composure. Your Honor, Bondi said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, I believe these revelations significantly change the constitutional analysis this court must undertake. We're no longer talking about federal oversight of ongoing state investigations. We're talking about federal prosecutors seeking to protect their own potentially misconduct-tainted investigation of matters the states have already resolved. Cannon nodded slowly, her earlier arrogance completely abandoned, like armor that had proven useless in battle. The court agrees that these developments require careful consideration. We'll recess for 30 minutes while I review these materials. As the judge stood to leave the bench, the courtroom erupted in conversation like a dam that had suddenly burst. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories, attorneys huddled in amazed discussion, and court staff exchanged incredulous looks. The federal marshals maintained their professional composure, but their expressions clearly showed they had never seen anything quite like this. Bondi calmly gathered her materials, her expression betraying none of the satisfaction she must have felt, like a poker player who had just won with a perfect hand. She had walked into what was designed to be a judicial ambush and turned it into a complete vindication of her legal position. Several attorneys approached her during the recess to express their admiration for what they had just witnessed. During the recess, word spread quickly through the legal community that something extraordinary had happened in courtroom 6. Attorneys from other courtrooms slipped in to watch the conclusion of what was already being called one of the most dramatic reversals in recent federal court history. The courthouse buzzed with excitement as news of Cannon's humiliation spread through the hallways like wildfire. Outside the courthouse, the earlier protesters were joined by curious onlookers who had heard about the dramatic developments inside. News vans began arriving, as reporters recognized that something significant was happening in the constitutional case they had initially dismissed as routine legal maneuvering. When Cannon returned to the bench 35 minutes later, her demeanor was completely different, like someone who had looked into a mirror and not liked what she saw. Gone was the theatrical arrogance, replaced by the careful professionalism that should have marked her approach from the beginning. Her law clerk had clearly spent the recess explaining the potential implications of the morning's events. After reviewing the materials provided by Miss Bondi, she began, her voice noticeably subdued, like a deflated balloon slowly losing air. This court finds that significant questions have been raised about the federal interest in this matter. She paused, looking directly at Bondi, with what appeared to be newfound respect, mixed with barely concealed embarrassment. The court commends counsel for bringing these important issues to our attention and for her thorough preparation. It was as close to an apology as federal judges typically offer, and everyone in the courtroom understood its significance. Professor Rodriguez smiled slightly as she took notes, recognizing that Cannon had learned a valuable lesson in judicial humility. Therefore, Cannon continued, this court will delay any ruling on federal jurisdiction, pending a full investigation of the matters raised by Ms. Bondi. The federal prosecutors will have 2 weeks to provide complete and accurate information about their investigation and its current status. As the gavel fell, marking the end of the hearing, the courtroom remained unusually quiet for several moments, like the calm after a powerful storm. Then, slowly, a buzz of conversation began to build, as attorneys and observers processed what they had witnessed. Many recognized that they had just seen legal history being made. Bondi packed her briefcase with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the hearing, like a surgeon completing a delicate operation. Several attorneys approached to congratulate her on what many were already calling a masterful performance. She accepted their praise graciously, while maintaining the professional demeanor that had served her so well. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Bondi, like moths drawn to a flame. True to her professional nature, she was gracious in victory, never gloating, never claiming personal satisfaction. Her comments focused on the larger constitutional principles, rather than the dramatic courtroom confrontation. Today demonstrated the importance of thorough preparation and the courage to challenge authority when necessary. She told the gathered media, her voice carrying the same authority that had commanded the courtroom. No one, not prosecutors, not judges, not government officials, should be exempt from accountability. When asked about Judge Cannon's behavior, Bondi diplomatically declined to comment, focusing instead on the substantive issues at the heart of the case. Her restraint and professionalism, in the face of provocation, only enhanced her reputation among legal observers. Within hours, legal blogs and news outlets were dissecting the hearing, with many calling it a textbook example of how superior preparation and unflappable composure could overcome even the most hostile judicial reception. Law professors across the country began incorporating the transcript into their advocacy courses as an example of brilliant courtroom strategy. For Judge Cannon, the hearing became a humbling lesson in the dangers of arrogance and the importance of judicial temperament. Veteran attorneys noted that her demeanor in subsequent cases showed marked improvement, suggesting she had learned from her encounter with Pam Bondi. The Judicial Conduct Board received several complaints about her behavior, but took no formal action. After Cannon demonstrated clear efforts to improve, the case itself was eventually resolved in favor of Bondi's clients, establishing important precedent about federal-state prosecutorial relationships and the requirement for good faith in jurisdictional claims. Legal scholars would later cite the Cannon decision as a turning point in federalism jurisprudence and a reminder that the Constitution's checks and balances still had meaning. But perhaps more importantly, the hearing demonstrated something that goes beyond legal technicalities. It showed that in the American justice system,
when it functions as intended, preparation and principle can still triumph over power and arrogance. It proved that even federal judges are not above accountability when they abuse their authority. Pam Bondi had walked into what was designed to be a judicial ambush and turned it into a clinic on legal advocacy. She had faced down a hostile judge, exposed prosecutorial overreach, and vindicated her client's constitutional rights, all while maintaining the professionalism and dignity that defined the best of the legal profession. The manila folder that had seemed so innocuous when her paralegal handed it to her that morning contained more than just documents. It contained proof that in America, when attorneys do their homework and stand their ground, even federal judges must listen to the truth. It demonstrated that courage and preparation can overcome institutional bias and judicial arrogance. Years later, when law students study courtroom advocacy, the hearing in Courtroom 6 serves as a reminder that the scales of justice can be balanced, not by power or position, but by preparation, principle, and the courage to speak truth to authority, no matter how intimidating that authority might appear. The legacy of that Tuesday morning in Miami extends far beyond a single legal victory. It stands as a testament to the enduring power of the American legal system, when dedicated advocates are willing to do the hard work of holding government accountable, regardless of the personal cost.